Today, I wanted to address something that's pretty close to my heart, which is this idea of can integral theory really help the world? It's an interesting question. I've been in the integral world since the mid 90s. First read Sex, Ecology, and Spirituality in 1996 and read it twice because it blew my mind. And ended up about a decade later working for Integral Institute and getting to work directly with Ken Wilber, which was a tremendous honor. And got to meet all kinds of very interesting people that were in that sort of, 1.0 version of Integral coming into the world. Yeah, so I've had about 30 years of my life, really almost my whole adult life, to sort of watch this movement unfold and see where I think it has some really interesting places that it can help the world. And I've seen some places where integral can really go off the cliff and do tremendous harm, do far more harm than good. So today's talk is going to be about those two sides, the proficient and the deficient. Okay, so can integral really help the world? That's the question. And for me personally, what does that mean? What does helping the world mean? Well, for me, it would mean that it would lead to more compassion, more empathy, more understanding, more personal discernment, and an overall forward momentum in my life and the people I care about lives and the institutions and places that I touch. So compassion, empathy, understanding, discernment, momentum, right? That's how I would define helping the world. Okay. So it's been very helpful when it's been put in the hands of some interesting people out there, from Robert Keegan to Terry O'Fallon, Keegan's student, Jennifer Garvey-Berger, who's over at McKinsey, the consulting firm, and doing really brilliant and interesting work over there. We have John Mackey at Whole Foods, who's, really been a long time student of integral and helped found conscious capitalism with the triple P, people, profit, planet, a triple net bottom line, trying to sort of expand the definition of capitalism to have more of a social and personal inclusion of what actually matters, what things are valued beyond profit. We've got Rand Stagen over at Stagen out in Dallas, and they're doing really beautiful, powerful work around consulting and helping leaders sort of understand and potentially develop more of a teal or integral view. And I'll talk about Rand a little bit later on. He has some interesting things that he's doing with the work and the theory. Personally, where I think integral can actually probably be the most help is, as many of you probably know, especially if you're here on Integral Life, right? We're facing what's called the polycrisis or the meta crisis in the world. And that's this idea that we are facing potentially existential threats to the species from a number of places. And they're happening all at once. They're all interdependent. And what makes them unique is they're all created and sustained by human activity for the first time in human history. And we would have those in technology, like, obviously the emergence of AI and how disruptive and potentially beneficial that is. We have that with what's going on with the late stage capitalism, the growing inequalities that we see in the world between the wealthy and the poor. Wealth is getting stratified. People are graduating at lower rates from college, and there's more desperation. There's obviously more polarization. There's the rise of the far right and the far left, and they're really going at each other. The middle's disappearing. We have a whole energy crisis, right? With the way we're using fossil fuels and how we're going to actually create a sustainable and not toxic way to generate energy, how we might actually even possibly get to a future where energy is free or close to free if we were to create something like fusion. So economic, political, environmental, technological, lots of places, obviously global warming and climate change, huge one. The plastic crisis, plastic is all over the place, microplastics. So it goes on and on and on. So all of this polycrisis, this meta crisis, what makes it so challenging, so confounding is that in order to solve it, you really have to be able to see the world through an integral lens, in my opinion. This is a place where integral can help the world. Why? Because these are what's called complex adaptive systems, these meta crises, and they're all interacting with each other. And what it requires is a mind that can actually see complex adaptive systems and see a larger whole. So if I'm an environmentalist and I really care about, I'm really passionate about global warming, Greta Thunberg, right? having that as a single issue is the one thing that I'm really concerned about. The trouble is that global warming is tied into these other crises as well. And fixing that isn't going to fix that much, right? We have to see that these problems are all arising, all interrelated, and addressing any of them requires that we be mindful of how they interact with the other ones, where the change just isn't really going to work. So I think integral theory can help people, because integral theory itself is a meta theory. It is a theory that has many complex adaptive systems inside of it. And so if you understand the theory, even at a rational level, you're much better off able to sort of understand how these other complex adaptive systems are interacting with each other. So let's move into the talk. So I'm going to talk about AQAL theory, Ken Wilber's version of integral. So this is like capital I integral. And Ken's theory, which he came up with quite a few years ago, the AQAL theory, right? AQAL, AQAL, it stands for all levels, lines, quadrants, states, and types. So let's first look at what works well, okay? So first thing is the quadrants. So Ken's quadrants, as most of you know, Ken splits reality into these 4 equal parts. And what the theory maintains is that reality always tetra arises through all 4 at the same time, all the time, with no exceptions anywhere. So that alone is a really helpful frame because, we have in the upper left quadrant, we have the mind, the space of the intersubjective mind, my thoughts, my feelings, all my interior reality, shadows, and right, spiritual states and personas and projections and all of that, right? That's all the upper left, the realm of psychology, some of the realm of introspective philosophy, right? But the idea of upper left is just the world that I know in my own interior reality. Upper right is the external corollary of that, right? It's the body, it's the meat puppet, and the cells, the atoms, everything that is quote unquote external. It's the brain versus the mind. And that would also include the 5 senses, right? So the external senses, which is how I interact with this external world to illuminate my interior reality, those 5 senses are really oriented in the upper right. So smell, sight, taste, right, etc. Lower half of the quadrants on the left side, we've got culture, and that's the sort of, that's the spoken language. It's the unwritten rules. A man offers his hand to me or a woman offers his hand, I know to shake it versus bowing in the West. Or if I'm in Japan, I might bow. Different cultural norms in Eastern Europe than there are in South America, than there are in Northern Africa, than there are in deeply fundamentalist Muslim countries, than there are in Canada versus, Boca Raton. So all of these different cultural norms, that's the lower left. And the lower right, that's all the systems, networks, technology, money, the natural environment, the government. It's all like the concrete manifestations of culture. The pyramids in ancient Egypt, right? So it's like the pyramids survived, but we don't know much about their culture, about what were the unwritten rules of living in Egypt in 2000 BC, right? No one really knows that. If it wasn't written down, it's gone. So we have these 4 quadrants, and where Ken was really helpful, and where I think this does help, where it is helpful when we are looking at can integral really help the world. What academics and professionals and even individuals tend to do is we tend to be biased towards one of those 4 quadrants. So psychologists, Freud, sort of reduced all of human existence to the mind and to emotions and to repressions. So he sort of reduced everything to the upper left. A scientist or a behavioralist, they're going to reduce everything to the upper right. A cultural anthropologist who might say something like science is just another worldview, right? It's no more right or wrong than any other cultural worldview. So they're going to put that the lower left is the dominant place where all human stuff really unfolds. And then over in the lower right, we're going to have people like economists, Marxists, who say that, everything can be reduced to the means of production, and other kinds of theories. The book Guns, Germs, and Steel, Guns, Germs, Steel, those are all lower right things. They're all concrete things. they're going to put the emphasis on human evolution and understanding human behavior and understanding human problems in the lower right quadrant. So integral can be really helpful because it can remind us that if we're really going to solve the meta crisis, or we're even going to understand ourselves or our world, we need to make sure that we understand all four quadrants, that reality tetra arises. To me, that's a huge asset. It's a huge plus. I've talked about the quadrants to a lot of people in a lot of different ways. It's pretty easy for people to get. I haven't had really any pushback. You give a few examples, people get it. They don't always get how vital it is to really live through those quadrants. I'll give you like one simple example. I was talking to a friend just a couple days ago, and she was like, yeah, this couple I know, they're having a hard time and blah, blah, blah. And like, but whenever they travel, they go from like fighting and having a hard time to sort of being reconnected and everything feels magical again and this and that. And I was like, well, of course, because they're changing the lower right quadrant. And when you radically change any of the quadrants, it impacts all of the other ones as well. So, you take a nice road trip and, usually you feel better. Maybe your blood pressure goes down, right? And it's like you experience different kinds of culture. So like all four quadrants end up changing. So just a simple way that it's kind of always happening.